for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I am Lindsay Aerts. Let's go inside Utah politics. Well, the state's Utah Fits All scholarship can continue as normal until the Utah Supreme Court weighs in, despite a recent ruling that the program is unconstitutional. Now, this scholarship uses state money that's allowed to flow to private schools, but a judge ruled that violates Utah's constitution. The state is likely to appeal, which is why the parties agreed it was best not to pause things for now. The big question, though, was whether the money could continue to be given out while they did that.
There will be no injunction in place. My understanding is that would mean things would just proceed as normal, and then listen until we have a decision by the Supreme Court.
That, of course, the judge there. Now, the state argued that the legislature is allowed to create this program because it's not directly part of the education system, and they've created other educational programs in the past. There's no timetable yet for when the Supreme Court might hear this. The state still needs to file its appeal. Well, I'm joined today by Carol Lear. She's a member of the State Board of Education and a plaintiff in this lawsuit. Carol, thank you for joining me today on Inside Utah Politics.
Thank you. Just to be clear, too, I am speaking on my own behalf, not, of course, for the State Board of Education, just as my own, based on my own thinking.
Yeah, and I remember that we've been through this before where board members are allowed, of course, to speak on their own and not represent the view of the State Board of Education.
For sure.
So appreciate you pointing that out. All right, so talk to me about this lawsuit. Why did you want to join it, and why do you believe the judge is right here and that the Supreme Court will ultimately uphold this?
Well, I've been in public education and on the legal side of public education for all of my career, 40 plus years. I've been on the state board since 2016. I have worked against vouchers for various varieties and kinds since 2007. So this is just another voucher that takes public money, takes from our traditional public schools, and it gives it to parents who want their children in private schools and in private programs. And that's always struck me as unconstitutional.
Now, other people call this a school choice program, right? Where parents are allowed to take this money and they're not thriving in the public education system. And so they take this money and kind of apply it to what they call choice in education, right? Just walk me through why you believe that's not allowed, though. You know, shouldn't everyone have sort of the ability to choose kind of how they do their education?
I absolutely believe in school choice, and it's interesting, the judge interjected, this is not a policy discussion in her decision. She's addressing the laws, the complaints that were filed before her. And I feel the same way. To me, this is not about school choice. This is about funding the traditional public education system that has been underfunded. And that gets to be a cliche, but it's true. It's been underfunded for the last 50, 60 years. Even our effort to fund public education that can be measured has been lower. So I fundamentally think that the most straightforward argument is that it is unconstitutional because the private schools that would receive this money are not open and free to all students. And that was a very simple statement, and the judge led with that.
Yeah, and so the state says, well, the program's not an educational program, right? They didn't designate it as such. They also say because voters have allowed for income tax dollars to be expanded in the past, in 2020, we had Amendment G where we allowed the money to flow towards children and people with disabilities. They said, well, we can use income tax dollars for other purposes. Obviously, you disagree with that.
Right, and the judge, interestingly, also made that point. She said, I'm not going to let the defendant, the state, circumvent the Constitution by saying this is outside of the public education system. And it's kind of a tautology because on the one hand, it can't be outside of the public education system and funded by public income tax. And then if it's inside the public education system, as we believe, then it has to be open and free for all, which is what the Constitution says about public schools.
What did you make of the judge's decision in the hearing this week that decided not to pause the Fits All scholarship? Because right now there are people waiting on applications to apply for next year. There are people who haven't gotten their scholarship money from last year. They still need to be paid out.
Right.
It seems like your side is okay with just letting this program continue, even though the judge deemed it unconstitutional.
I think there were lots of factors, a few of those factors. No one wants to disrupt families, even if what they're pursuing is, in our view, not a constitutional way to serve students in public schools. Nobody wants to disrupt families, make them decide something different in a matter of days or weeks. And the application dates are very close. Secondly, we don't know for sure what the Supreme Court will decide, and the plaintiffs want to give the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, the time it needs to make a thoughtful, thorough decision, as Judge Scott did. So I think that weighed in favor of not rushing it, even though this would be a reasonably good time to cut it off. And so that was one of the biggest reasons.
Yeah, because you can see where it would disrupt families if we paused the scholarship and then the Supreme Court ultimately reinstated it. It would sort of be this ping-ponging of the program, right?
So I was a little disappointed, I'll be honest, but I think it was a fair and wise decision on the part of the plaintiffs' attorneys.
Right, to step back and sort of be like, let's think about the system as a whole here.
Yes.
So the other key piece of this is that teacher salaries increases that we gave in 2023 are tied to the Utah Fits All scholarship, meaning if the scholarship is not in effect, teachers stand to lose about half of the raises that they got back in 2023. What do you tell teachers who are facing this reality?
And that's all. I was talking to a fellow board member today who said, I've talked to teachers who say, we can't afford a house. We can't afford to live near where I teach unless we have some extra money. I thought that bribe, and I'll call it what I felt like it was inappropriate to begin with. That doesn't mean sometimes we don't need the money, but I think we'll have to, I would hope that the legislature and the legislators would step up and say, we can see that our teachers need more money to afford to live in Utah, and be willing to fill that gap. But that was another factor in being okay about letting the program continue until we don't know what they'll lose. Or maybe the legislature will be generous and appropriate to great school teachers.
We'll see how that all plays out.
Right.
Talk to me about how, if this whole lawsuit is about school, well, you say it's about where public dollars can go, right? But if presumably it is about school choice and giving people another option if public school is not working for them, how do we support the public school system? If you don't want this money to go to another program, we want it to stay in public education, but clearly public education is not working for some folks.
I think that's an assumption we make. One of the things that's troubling about this lawsuit that is not necessarily part of the judge's decision is that there's no accountability, or minimal, let me put it that way, minimal accountability. So we don't know when parents say, well, it's not working for us. Well, give me some metrics, give me some data. Because traditional public school students and even non-traditional, I mean, charter school students, we all take the same accountability tests. And all these students have is a portfolio, and who knows how that will be judged by the program manager, a person outside of the public education system. So I don't necessarily buy without data, this isn't working for us. And let me also point out, if we had the time today, there are about 9 to 10 different kinds of programs in public education. There are magnet schools, there are charter schools. We have more open enrollment than I know of in any of the neighboring states. So you can go to Highland High School for one part of the day and East High School for another. Charter school students, private school students can play sports with the traditional high schools and participate in activities, choirs, theater. So we have more choice, if we're going to focus on that, than any other state I know. I have to throw in one other piece that I think is essential. I think that when we talk about choice, I think of public education, it's a community service. This isn't about what do my children get or what does my little neighborhood get. This is a public service for all children and all families. I don't get a little piece of the public sanitation budget because I don't like the garbage service in my neighborhood. I don't get a little piece of the police department because I want my private security. We pay for it because it does good things for a lot of the community.
Carol Lear is a member of the State Board of Education. She's also a plaintiff on the Utah Fits All scholarship lawsuit that we're waiting for a ruling on a Supreme Court. Any predictions on how long that could take and when we could see a ruling?
I know that the plaintiffs and the defendants agreed that there were 2 counts that the judge didn't address because she already found it unconstitutional under the first 2
Right. So those
counts.
were moot.
So she
Right.
did this. No, she asked the 2 parties if they would like her to rule on those.
Right.
And they said yes.
Yep.
And the state seemed more anxious to have a yes than the plaintiffs. But she said 2 to 3 weeks. So again, that'll be
We
a
won't even
delay.
get that ruling for 2 to 3 weeks. Then we've got to argue the case. We've got to wait for the appeal to be filed. Then we've got to argue the case
and have it scheduled.
and
And then it
all
will
of
be
that.
argued, and then the Supreme Court will. I just could not even guess. I think it'll be months. We've waited. We've been patient. This is an excellent ruling. I am just I'm very respectful of this judge and what a thorough job she did.
Nothing is ever fast in the justice
And
system.
it shouldn't be,
Yeah.
because slow is fast and fast is slow.
Yeah, interesting. Carol, thank you so much for
Sure.
joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Still ahead on Inside Utah Politics, we'll dig more into this topic with our panel, plus plans to give new moms $5,000, where they stand, and is that enough? We'll talk about that when we come back.
Watching Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. It's been a busy week, both here in Utah and over in Washington. Our panel here to weigh in on all of it. I'm joined by Leah Murray with the Walker Institute of Politics at Weber State University, and Taylor Morgan of Morgan and May Public Affairs, a consulting firm here in the state of Utah. Thank you both for being here. Okay, so let's start with the Utah Fits All Scholarship, because this was a big ruling this week that the program has been deemed unconstitutional, but it can continue because the judge did not pause it while basically the state appeals, and then we wait for the Supreme Court to weigh in. So Leah, let me start with you. Did the judge get it right here?
Oh, I think probably, right? If you read the Constitution closely, it seems pretty clear that you're not supposed to take money and give it to a family to make a choice about their education.
You're not supposed to take income tax dollars.
Correct.
You're
Oh, yeah,
saying,
I
which is
apologize. Right, yes.
earmarked for
That's right,
education.
That's right. Pretty
Yeah.
clear to me.
Yeah.
I think the real fundamental question here is the difference between statute and the Utah Constitution. The Utah Constitution clearly says that public education has to be free and open to all Utahns. Statute gives Utah parents the primary responsibility for making choices about their kids' education. Recently, just a few years ago, Utah voters expanded the definition of education to potentially provide that constitutional guarantee about free and open to some Utah kids who have disabilities or whose needs may not be getting met in traditional public schools. So the question is this constitutional? And of course, that is the basis of the litigation, and we will see.
Yeah, and that was the state's defense, right? Is that the voters expanded the use of income tax dollars for educational programs for children and for people with disabilities, and therefore they should be able to expand it in this way too. The judge said, no, you can't, because when we were talking about Amendment G, we were never talking about the school choice, school voucher program with that. We were talking about kids and people with disabilities.
Right. So, I mean, I guess the argument would be made if all the children who are in the Utah Fits All have a disability, then maybe constitutionally the statute complies.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case realistically.
Right.
We've also seen recently a lot of issues with the accountability or the lack thereof of how the Fits All scholarship money is being spent by Utah parents. A lot of it is going to homeschooling. We tightened up some of the controls around how that money can be spent in just this session. For example, we knew that some of that money was being spent on travel, on things like ski passes. I don't think that is or was the intention of the legislature, but a lot of questions about this policy and a lot happening with this litigation. Teacher pay raises are also caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, that is so true because of the way the bill was written. So if we can just kind of zoom out a little bit and talk to me about the implications of this ruling when it comes to this battle we've seen with the courts versus the legislature. How does this ruling fit into that?
Wow.
So I will just say, I think we've got legislative I don't want to say overreach, right? But they are passing 591 bills, right?
Yeah.
Like a session. They are doing a lot of work. I think that they were somewhat assertive toward the judiciary this last session. So you've got some fireworks, I think,
Yeah.
between the branches. And I just think the judiciary is a little bit clapping back.
Absolutely right. I think we have a legislature that has consolidated power to a historically unprecedented degree. We have a governor who is, for whatever reason, a bit on the sidelines right now, commenting but not taking action on a lot of these issues. And again, the legislature has been really pushing the envelope on a lot of, some would say controversial or on issues that could test the boundaries of the Utah Constitution recently. Mm-hmm. The courts are becoming much more active, checking the legislature than they have been in a very long time.
And then we see the legislature coming back and trying to check the courts, right? And refine the courts in different ways, which they say the Constitution does give them that authority, right?
Right. No, and I think it's interesting how you talk about the governor kind of not weighing in. If there has to be in checks and balances, horizontal checks and balances. If the governor, if the executive is not going to play a role, the judiciary is going to step into that vacuum.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think if he,
exactly.
right. So if he, there's, it's a power game, right? Politics is how power flows. And if he's not going to do anything, they're going to.
Well, staying on the topic of education, but maybe this is all connected, right? The HB 267 referendum, which is the anti-collective bargaining law that we just passed. The public labor unions are trying to repeal that by getting it on the ballot. They are pacing very well in their signature numbers. Your predictions on how this turns out, and what does that referendum say in the overall picture of education? You've got the UEA, the teachers union, that is basically at the forefront of both of that, and the Utah Fits All scholarship, who are saying, no, legislature, we don't like that. And it seems like the people are supporting that.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are super pro teacher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And so a little bit, I'm not sure they're super pro union, right? But if the conversation is around, this feels like a smackdown of teachers. This feels like it's not being nice to our teachers. I think that's a rallying cry that people are coming out for.
Well, and in the current political climate, in this environment where we have had an all-powerful legislature really step out on some key issues and gain a lot of public notoriety. Thinking of amendments A and D just last year that were voided by the state Supreme Court. Voters right now, while they are generally happy with the direction of the state and they're happy with Republicans being in charge at the legislature, if you get down in the polling, it shows clearly if you get down to the issues, Utah voters have some real concerns about some things the legislature is doing. I think the referendum right now, and I perhaps have been very critical or very skeptical of this referendum. The ability to gather this many signatures in 30 days, and Lindsay, it appears as if they are tracking to not only have at least 140,000 valid signatures, but to have well above that minimum across perhaps even 26 of 29 Senate districts. They only need 15.
Well, and people may not know, Taylor, you have run signature gathering campaigns because you are the backer of Count My Vote, which is the reason we have the dual path to the ballot right now and got us, not only the caucus convention system, but the signature path to the ballot. So you're very familiar with what it takes to get signatures on the ballot. And so this pacing is pretty
incredible. It's astounding. It is far above and beyond what I thought they'd be capable of, even with nearly $3 million coming in, we know, from the National Education Association. Still, they have mobilized and collected more signatures than I ever thought possible. I think they will qualify for the ballot. That will put a stay on the collective bargaining ban. This could be a fundamental shift in Utah's political landscape.
Very interesting. Okay, let's switch to some national headlines now. The Trump administration is floating the idea of helping Americans have more children. We know that our birth rates are declining. It impacts economies, right, when we don't have enough children. But the ideas that they've floated are a little questionable. A lot of people are pushing back on those. $5,000 for families, just kind of like a cash bonus for having kids, more education around women's menstrual cycles, things like that, opening up some of those programs that allow people to travel abroad and get federal funding to do that, making those available for married folks. What do you guys make of those ideas, and what are the solutions for fixing our birth rate?
Right. I mean, I think infertility is an issue. I don't want to say infertility, but like declining birth rates across the planet. And there are a number of reasons I think young people don't want to have kids. I don't know, in Utah it might be I can't afford to buy a house. So why am I going to bring into the world children if I'm living in my parents' basement, right? So I think a $5,000 bonus doesn't get me a down payment, right? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't pay rent for more than 2 months. So it's a nice, cute, I think, idea, but it doesn't actually get to the root cause or the problem of why people are making choices not to have children, and a little bit our policies should address those.
Yeah, I really liked former Senator Mitt Romney's approach with his family tax credit proposal. We'll see if that goes anywhere. I like the idea of incentivizing younger Americans to start having their families or have more kids by adjusting the way we do that child tax credit. I think we could improve that. However, really, it's the underlying economy that is the real issue. With interest rates incredibly high, with so much uncertainty in the economy right now, not just younger Americans, businesses, all of us are very hesitant and wary of taking any kind of risks, of investing in our future in any real way. And certainly kids are expensive.
Yeah.
And that's a huge risk for younger Americans thinking about starting their families, starting out. It's a very discouraging time to be taking those kind of risks right now.
I always think about this in terms of our culture too, if I can just zoom out. This chicken or the egg approach when it comes to, do policies have to change first and then culture changes, or does culture change first and then politicians follow and create policies that fit what we're already doing, right? You talk about paid family leave, like that is something many Americans have called for. We've never seen the government come in and help with that. Should they, and or, you know, does that change? And then because we kind of have this like work until you're dead culture, right, in America.
Yeah. If I can jump in really quickly, a couple points. First, I really liked what you said about infertility treatment. I think that's a big deal. Our legislature has expanded coverage for that under the public health plan here in Utah. That's something that my wife and I dealt with. Incredibly expensive. That is a real thing that is happening, I believe, at higher rates than many people are aware. So that's important. In terms of the question about culture, this is maybe me being a little bit of a cynic, but we often think politicians are our leaders, and I've never seen it that way. Politicians are nothing more than a reflection of us and our culture. We get, in our leaders and politicians, we get who we are. And until we as a culture change and adjust our priorities, we're not going to get change when it comes to our politicians or elected leaders.
But we're not really incentivized to change, right?
Right, but I would also argue, and I'd add a layer to it, our economics very much constrains our individual choices. If I cannot afford a home, whatever the culture is telling me. Does that make sense? Like I'm telling my children, you have to buy a home. If their answer is, I cannot afford that, me trying to put forth a cultural value of home ownership, right, just runs into that wall of it's unaffordable, right? So I would just argue, I think the economics kind of shapes all of us.
Yeah,
really
definitely.
important. Leah Murray with the Walker Institute of Politics, thank you for joining me today. And Taylor Morgan of Morgan & May Public Affairs. We'll have you both back, so thank you so much for your insights today. And stick with us on Inside Utah Politics. We will be right back.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, that's going to do it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. I'd love to get your emails, InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media, X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram. Just search for Lindsay on air, and Lindsay is spelled with an A. Now, you can also find our show online. It's in podcast form. Just search for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts anywhere you get your podcasts. Well, thanks for being with us, everyone. We will see you next week on Inside Utah Politics.